and I say, okay, well, with my knowledge at that time, I was going to become a chemical engineer, but I changed to become a doctor. At that time, as a chemical engineer who was really, really into chemistry, I said, well, let's see if I can like piece any of this together as a chemist. So I look at it and I go, okay, well, let's look at what I'm using as a fuel source. I'm supposed to be using, or what I use when I eat carbohydrate versus when I eat lipid. So when I'm eating carbohydrate, I am burning all this glucose as a fuel source. And I look at that and I go, okay, well, what's the glucose molecule look like? And glucose molecule, it's a little bit polar. It has a lot of these OH bonds, but there's in particular, there's one bond which is bonded to an oxygen. And that, if the glucose molecule is unstable enough, it can end up going from a ring structure to a completely straight structure. And when it's in that straight structure, it is very reactive. Now, if you put that in your body, so much false information going about. When you think that you're eating these plants in order to save the animals, like where do you think these plants came from? They came from the used to be habitats of these animals. You killed all their habitat and then they just died because they have nowhere else to go. Like
Is this your way of saying that you're not showering?
I have not. When I discovered this, I think the last time I showered was 1,400 and something days ago. It's ridiculous.
Blaise, how did you find Carnivore?
Well, that's a really long story, and honestly, it started out of complete boredom, just pure boredom. I had absolutely nothing to do at the time. So like just as a preface, I'm a really heavy science person. So whenever it comes to anything I do at all, I'm really, really focused on the science and the detailed science behind it. And it doesn't really matter what it is. Usually it can be chemistry, it can be biochemistry or endocrinology. And I'm really interested in all of that. And that's because I want to become a doctor in the future and help a lot of people. But the origin of it starts in Abu Dhabi when I was in that was 2020 when COVID hit, and that caused the lockdowns. And also, I wasn't able to do much because a really popular game that I play wasn't available over there. It was really difficult to play over there. It's called League of Legends, and I'd usually spend a lot of my time doing that, and then some of the time on YouTube learning. But I had no possible way to play League of Legends, so I said, "Well, what do I want to do with my time in Abu Dhabi? I'm stuck here probably for 2, maybe 3 months. I got to do something." So I spent 12, sometimes 14 hours every day on YouTube just trying to find science behind the optimal health lifestyle, I guess. And it was a little bit contradictory information because I came across a lot of things that said like, oh, you need a low protein diet, like from David Sinclair, which was a very popular longevity person at the time. But if you look at some of the things that he did, especially as of recently with resveratrol, he definitely forged his data or did some very funny things with his data, and it shows. So that I ran into his information, but then I also ran into another channel, and it was called What I've Learned, and he talked about fasting in that video, and he goes into detail behind ketosis, and he even brings up a little bit about how the body functions if it's given fat versus glucose. So that would be glycolysis versus gluconeogenesis. And I was like, oh, okay, this he's like really going into the biochemistry of this. He's even showing like the pathways of, for instance, glucose to make pyruvate and pyruvate to make glucose, which is glycolysis versus gluconeogenesis. And I said, okay, well, that's really interesting. So I sort of watched all of his videos, but he wasn't necessarily something on full carnivore. He was just at that time discovering fasting himself, and he figured out some things, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. Let's try fasting. So I got pretty heavy into it really quickly. I said, you know what, we're going 3 day fast immediately, which my mom at that time, because I was trapped in the room with her, she was like, no, this is unacceptable. You will not go 3 days without eating. Like she was so worried. She's like, I don't want to have to take you to the hospital. I don't want to have to bring you anywhere. Like this is ridiculous. No, Blaise, you're not doing this. And I'm like, Mom, I want to do this. I really want to do this. I need to see if this works because you're supposed to feel effects like a sort of euphoria effect after like the third or fourth day. And I was really, really like interested in that because I've always had, I never noticed it at the time, but I had like really big brain fog. I had a lot of bloating. I had so much bloating that I thought eating food and feeling pain afterwards was normal. Like that was a really normal thing for me. And I didn't actually know that like that's not normal. And you could actually eat food without feeling pain in your stomach, without gas also. I mean, that's another really big one. So yeah, it started with boredom, and then eventually I did a couple more fasts in Abu Dhabi, and they all went really well. I felt actually better than I did before. I wasn't like I didn't feel like I was at my peak condition like I am now, but I felt much much better. And then afterwards, I went from Abu Dhabi to Florida, and when I was in Florida, I experimented a little more with fasting, and I came across a couple of other really really important people when it comes to the scientific research behind some of these things. So, for instance, Benjamin Bickman was a really big one. Um, so he explains the difference like a calorie is not always a calorie. So a calorie of glucose versus a calorie of lipid or fat are perceived two completely different ways by the body. And if you're and also the difference between like an anabolic state and a catabolic state, which is and for instance, if anabolism is like you're eating carbs and catabolism is you're eating fat, and that's because you're causing the synthesis of hormone sensitive lipase. So that's another really big one. And hormone sensitive lipase is mandatory to burn fat. So if you don't have hormone sensitive lipase active, you won't lose any weight. Like it's all based on the insulin to glucagon ratio. So yeah, that was a really revolutionary thing for me. I learned that was really cool. And carnitine also. So carnitine is really important for ketosis, being in an efficient state of ketosis, anyways. So all of that I learned from Benjamin Bickman. I got really excited again, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for an even bigger fast this time. And afterwards, I'm going to have a little bit more protein after I break the fast. Because before I would usually not have protein, but this time I was like, you know what? I'll have protein with fat. So I'll have meat, and then I'll have like some other stuff on the side because I thought vegetables were good at the time still, and they were needed because my family brought me up like that. Sadly, and so many bad things happened because of it. But it is what it is. So, and then I said I need to see like how important this insulin to glucagon ratio is when it comes to burning fat. So I got on a scale. I weighed myself. I was I think 169 at the time. I can't remember exactly. It was around that weight, and I decided, okay, let's see how this insulin to glucagon ratio, how big this thing is, like in losing fat and all that stuff. And I said, okay, 9 day fast, let's do it. After day 4, I felt the euphoria. That felt great. I loved it. Really relaxed, like super, super calm. It was unlike anything I have ever experienced. It's really, really something else. And then day 9 hits. I weigh myself, and I went from 169 to about 159 or 160. So I basically lost 10 pounds within that time. And I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like this is almost like 2 pounds a day, basically, or maybe even a little more. Like I was really, really shocked. I mean, I don't know if me exercising also has a possible role in that. I didn't exercise too much when during that time, but I still exercised a little. So that could be some of the reasons. But I lost like so much weight, and I was always 169. Didn't matter how hard I exercised. I was just 169, 169, 169. So that was really, really big shock to me. And I was like, wow, this is really something else. This is working. I'm fasting. Like, and I go crazy about this like 3 day, 5 day fast. I mean, God, I would just do this regularly. I'd eat one meal, like 3 day fast, one meal, 5 day fast, one meal, 3 day fast. Or I just like it was endless. Like I was so shocked with the results and like how well this worked. So because I really felt like I didn't realize that it was because I was regularly feeling so bad because a lot of these other things that I ate, they showed in my skin too. Like I had tons of acne. I had like really bad back eczema, all that cleared up. I mean, you could probably see my face right now in comparison to before. Uh, if I get like a picture of me before, I mean, I had like at least 5, 6 acne spots, maybe on one side of my face sometimes, and then I'd have like 3 up here, and then 2 like on the other side. It was just terrible. So it did a lot of things. But at that time, it was definitely going a little bit less. So I was getting like less acne. So I was happy about that, but it was still acne regardless. And then I ran into another person by accident, which is Malcolm Gladwell. And he talks about how like saturated fat versus unsaturated fat when it comes to the Minnesota Coronary Heart Survey. That was a really, really big thing too, because I always heard LDL is bad. LDL is bad for you. You shouldn't have high LDL. And if you look at the Minnesota Coronary Heart Survey, which is the biggest randomized control trial of the nutrition field that I am like aware of, I don't think there's a bigger one. And not only is it a randomized control trial that has tons and tons of patients, they're measuring like one of the most critical things, which is LDL bad for you, basically, or is LDL good for you? In this case, is saturated fat or is unsaturated fat good for you? And 9,000 patients, about 4,000 of them, 4,500 are on polyunsaturated fat. So they're eating the exact same diet. The only difference is one group has all of their food cooked in butter, lard, tallow, and the other group has it all cooked in like Crisco, vegetable oil, canola, grapeseed, like that sort of thing. And they found that this group here that had all their saturated fat, that ate saturated fat, they were lived like 6 years on average, I think higher than this group here. So that's basically like that's being an alcoholic. Like it basically means this group is almost no different than being an alcoholic. It's that bad for you, or smoking. I mean, it's terrible. On top of that, I think it was 30 milligrams, every 30 milligrams per deciliter less cholesterol you have a 22% chance higher all-cause mortality, which is basically like death from almost anything. It could be like a heart attack, it could be stroke, doesn't really matter. But the whole point is it's ridiculously large increase. So every single time I hear this low LDL thing now, and after like the Malcolm Gladwell, I'm like, are you crazy? Like this study came out in 1987 or something. This is 40 years ago, and we're still thinking this. So to me, it's ludicrous. And I have a couple ideas as to why. I do know that like there's a church, literally a religious organization involved in uh, hiding some of this, like the Seventh Day Adventist. But I think there's another reason, and I'll probably get towards that towards the end. But I learned Malcolm Gladwell, him talking about the Minnesota Coronary Heart Survey. I was so happy. So I was like, okay, well, I now know that I want to cook all my stuff in like butter, lard, tallow. So I was like, it's time to order a lot of butter, a lot of lard, and a lot of tallow. So I ordered like, I started to become so addicted to butter. It probably, I don't know if it's good or not, but I would just eat the butter raw, like Kerrygold salted butter raw, because it tasted so good. And I didn't realize it before. But I was like, oh my God, this is so good. What the heck? So I just eat this stuff raw before I would end up going on this like like massive feast that I would have from a fast. I mean, I was so in love with butter at that time. I really, really loved it. And afterwards I said, okay, well, clearly, like if all of this is working so well, there has to be like an end point. Like there has to be something that works even better. Because I've never had like so many of these problems I've had before get cured. Like when I go on the fast, no stomach pain. My skin like clears up quite a bit, like a lot better than before. Um, I'm losing. I noticed I actually did better when working out, which was like odd to me because I'm like I'm not eating food. Why am I doing better? Like this doesn't like it doesn't make sense intuitively if you're taught like, oh, eating food is your energy. Like eating food is your energy. Like you only get food. The only energy source you can get is from food. So like that's why all these bodybuilders are like eating bread and rice with chicken all the time. It's like the bread and rice part I don't understand, but the chicken part I do now. So I came across that, and then I said, okay, let's see if I can find anything else. I was pretty unsuccessful in finding other things. It took a really long time before I found carnivore. It took about 2 years or so. I was just like searching everything, and I kept coming across these things. It's like vegan, go vegan, go vegan, go vegan. And I was like, man, come on, like give me some other like. I saw this before, and I've lived this my entire life basically. I mean, my like that's the way my parents sort of brought me up in a sense. It was like if you look at my tray table whenever I was eating, I even have a picture of it where it was just like blueberries. It was tons of these fruits, watermelon, melon. Um, I mean, it was just constantly fruits, constantly vegetables, broccoli, uh, asparagus, all this vegetables. And I was taught that it was healthy my entire life. And I looked at that and I went, I lived this my entire life almost. And like, I don't feel that good. And now I'm changing, I'm doing different things and I'm feeling way better. So clearly something like I'm doing something in the right direction. I just didn't know what. And I got really lucky after 2 years, but it took like 2 years to get there. I found Anthony Chafee. And I found him talk about phytotoxins. And I got really interested in that because he said, the pesticides that we spray on these plants is nothing compared to the amount of herbicides and pesticides that these plants themselves produce, which is like 10,000 times the amount. And I was like, this is insane. What? I've never heard of this before. So that got me really curious. I went down that rabbit hole and eventually I found out he's a carnivore and he eats only meat. And I was like, okay, this is like not what I expected, but I mean, hey, if it works, and he's got quite a bit of science to back it up too. He's got like anthropology data. He's got, I mean, it was just like endless. It was constant. I was like, geez, it really doesn't end. And I already learned, and I mixed that in with Benjamin Bigman's work on the insulin to glucagon ratio. And I looked at that and I went, well, I mean, it makes sense. Like, I'm going to get really shredded. I'm going to get completely lean because the body isn't going to be utilizing any almost exogenous glucose given to it, like because you're not giving any carbohydrates. So I was like, well, I mean, it matches up with a lot of this other research, Malcolm Gladwell's research as well. I was like, well, might as well go for it. So I'm with my mom at the time, and I said, Mom, I can't eat anything else but meat now. She goes, what? What are you talking about? And I go, yep, I can only eat meat. That is it. I can't eat anything else. So she gets like completely frustrated and like panics because she's hearing like high LDL. I have high LDL. That's a problem. And I'm like, no, Mom, that's not a problem. Like, this is the research. She's like, no, the doctor knows best. Like, the doctors went to medical school. He's been there for 7 years. Like, he trained all this time. And I look at it and I'm like, but he was trained in the wrong information. Like, he was literally trained with false information, like the lipid heart hypothesis. That is just false. That's completely false. And the fact that it continues to this day is just, to me, it's mind blowing. I really don't know what to say, but that's still rampant. And she was really worried about the LDL thing. And I'm like, Mom, trust me. Like I did a 9-day fast and you were so panicked. I mean, you were just terrified of all this stuff. And look at how I turned out. It ended up working way better. So eventually, after some extreme frustration and her yelling a little bit, she eventually said, fine, whatever. Just eat only meat. I don't care, Blaise. I don't care. Do whatever you want. So I eat only meat and I ended up, I mean, the amount of things that changed after that moment of going full carnivore was just huge. It was like I didn't have any stomach pain after I ate at all. There was no bloating whatsoever. And I was shocked by this because I was so used to this. I grew up my entire life. I mean, even since I was like I even remember when I was 3 years old in Ukraine in a small apartment. That was during the Orange Revolution. Even though I was 3 years old at the time, I still remember like my stomach being in pain. I remember that same thing when I was in the Bahamas at like 5 years old. I was in like agonizing pain. Um, I even one time when I was in the Netherlands, like 18, 19 years old, I don't know what I ate, but after a certain point, like I needed to go to the hospital and I felt like I was going to die. I was just laying outside on this table in the dark at like 12, I think, or 11 in like just really ridiculously late looking at the sky and I was like, if I die today, that's just the way it is. Like I accept it because I was in so much agonizing pain and I didn't experience any of that on carnivore. And this was like unheard of. I was like, what's going on? This is not Like I was not expecting such insanely good results. So again, that got me more curious, and I was like, why is this all working? What's the science behind this? How does it happen? And I started to go again. I went down even further down the rabbit hole, and I ended up learning, I mean, tons and tons of things. Like all our ancestors were carnivores, were apex carnivores. I mean, they were just eating. They were eating so many uh, other animals that around the same time, tons of other carnivorous animals started to go extinct, and that's probably because we were eating them all. It's not like guaranteed, but that's like a really, like a sudden lift. I don't know. Maybe there's a correlation. Like they all die around this time. We start thriving at this time. Clearly, there's something going on there. So that sort of, I looked at that and I was like, okay, there's definitely something there. Uh, as well as the way our face is shaped. So our face is like our face is shaped like a predator. If you look at a lot of like herbivorous or prey animals, their face is like a rabbit, for instance. They have eyes that cover like 360, or try to anyways cover 360 degrees of vision, and that's so that they can see if there's like a predator behind them. But that doesn't tell them the distance of the predator, so they have less depth perception, and predators have more depth perception, so we can like tell the distance of something better. Really good example, like depth perception in real life, is playing basketball. So if you ever shoot a ball, you have to try to gauge like how far the basket is, and like about how high. Yeah, so that sort of thing. Um, and I learned that, and I was like, okay, that's really really interesting. I also learned, I came across Elizabeth Bright, I think her name is, and she talks about cholesterol. Cholesterol is also the precursor to tons and tons of these really, really important steroid hormones that without them, you could, like, serious problems can be caused. So, just an example, like all the estrogens, so there's estrone, estradiol, and estriol, all of them are dependent on being made by cholesterol, or you can synthesize them by going in the sun, but it's better to have them through cholesterol, um, as well as vitamin D uh, and bile salts. So I mean, and these are really, really important things for the immune system, especially. So a lot of women specifically have autoimmune disorders. Like they're 80% of the autoimmune disorders come from women. And why might that be? Well, because a lot of these hormones play a really, really important role in these immune disorders. Like, I mean, so important. If you look at the, for instance, like I think it was estradiol and estriol, both of those hormones are linked to either having lupus or multiple sclerosis. Like if not proper, like if you have enough of them, yeah. So it's like really big things. Like you look at this and go like, what's going on? Like, that makes so much sense now. Like cholesterol is so important. I mean, so many things I kept learning, and I was just like, it's endless. There's just too much evidence to support carnivore over and over and over and over again. It doesn't end. And then I tried to look at this and I say, okay, well, with my knowledge at that time, I was going to become a chemical engineer, but I changed to become a doctor. At that time, as a chemical engineer who was really, really into chemistry, I said, well, let's see if I can like piece any of this together as a chemist. So I look at it and I go, okay, well, let's look at what I'm using as a fuel source. I'm supposed to be using, or what I use when I eat carbohydrate versus when I eat lipid. So when I'm eating carbohydrate, I am burning all this glucose as a fuel source. And I look at that and I go, okay, well, what's the glucose molecule look like? And glucose molecule, it's a little bit polar. It has a lot of these OH bonds, but there's in particular, there's one bond which is bonded to an oxygen, and that if the glucose molecule is unstable enough, it can end up going from a ring structure to a completely straight structure. And when it's in that straight structure, it is very reactive. Now, if you put that in your body and you assume, well, there's a reactive glucose in your body, it's bad. So you wouldn't want that. And you do the same thing with the lipid. Okay, well, let's look at the structure of a lipid. Well, a lipid is just this giant hydrocarbon chain. It's so difficult to make this thing react. Like it's so difficult for this thing to become unstable. If you just look at it from a basic chemistry perspective. And I looked at that and I was like, wait a second. Alzheimer's, because because the brain is in such a high uses most of the energy, then I would assume the brain is in a high energy state. That means that that glucose molecule is more likely to go from ring to straight. And what happens when that becomes straight? It causes glycation because it's really reactive and it needs to bind with something. It wants to bind with anything. It goes like, get me here, get me attached, get me attached. So I looked at the Alzheimer's thing as well. And if you put Alzheimer's patients on a carnivore diet, I mean, it doesn't always fully cure them because I mean they've damaged their brain at a certain point. It's pretty bad, but it definitely helps a lot. I mean, it throws them back a couple stages, and it's like that's a really big thing. So just even if you look at it from a basic chemistry perspective, like if you've ever taken chemistry in high school and you still remember it, which I'm not gonna lie, it's a little difficult to remember some things from high school, but if you do still remember a little bit of it, you'll go like, oh yeah, that's the positive charge and that's the negative charge. And then it's like, oh yeah, this is probably not like this isn't as strong, this is a stronger bond, this isn't as strong of a bond. And it all makes sense. You piece it together again and you go like, I mean, glucose isn't a good fuel. Like if you use glucose as a fuel, a lot of other problems happen. And I never really understood why fat and glucose couldn't mix, why lipids and glucose couldn't mix until I saw Bart K and his thing on the Randall cycle. And then I went, oh, that makes so much sense. Because if you stimulate one of them, then it forces the other one to be off. And if you stimulate both of them, then it just locks all of the basically source nutrients outside of the body, or the glucose in this case outside of the body, or lipids for that matter. And they end up in the bloodstream. And what happens when glucose is in the bloodstream? Well, it ends up potentially reacting or messing up erythrocytes, which are red blood cells. It ends up messing up like uh, the stomach region. I mean, there's like it's just tons and tons of things. So I came across him, and I was like, it's all like all of this information is getting pieced together. Another person, I don't remember her name, but she's a quantum biologist, and she talks about it from a physics perspective, which like biology and chemistry is something else. But if you ever go into physics, physics is just a complete, in my opinion anyways, a nightmare as a scientist. Like physical chemistry is the hardest chemistry. Anytime you mix anything with physics, it just becomes so difficult because the level of precision and all of this detail, it's just like it hurts. It hurts to like actually being able to like understand it. But I came across her and she also explains it, except she explains it from a completely different perspective, which is related to deuterium. It's like, wow, this is another thing that is just completely for carnivore. Like it's not just all these other small things. Like it comes down to the very basic function of oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria and how it goes from photosystem. Photosystem, that's in plants. Complex 1 to complex 4, and then to oxygen. And I was like, it just, to me, it was so mind blowing how an isotope of basically deuterium is like heavy water, so it's instead of yeah. Anyways, it's that really made me like shocked. I looked at that and I went, "There's too much evidence for carnivore at this point," and I want to do something. Like I know all of this, I know the science, but for some reason I'm not always finding somebody putting all of this science together. And it sort of frustrates me because I have to like reach into the depths of YouTube for like 12 hours a day sometimes just to find all of this. And then I have to keep doing this over and over again, like going through different searches. It's like, oh, maybe this person has it. Maybe this person has it. Maybe this person has it. Keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And it's just so exhausting. And I'm lucky because I have the free time to do that. But for somebody who's trying to like fix themselves and they don't have the free time to do that, I looked at that and I was like, man, this is like terrible. Like how are they supposed to find this? How are they supposed to do any of this? So I I'm a little optimistic, or I try to be anyway sometimes, even though I don't see a super good future. But regardless, I try to be as optimistic as I can with the information that I have. And I said, well, I'm going to make a YouTube channel, and I'm going to try to go behind go into the science behind all of this. I'm going to try to talk about like my personal experience, just some of the things, like just some other things about my life. So I made my YouTube channel. It's not that big, but that's the whole purpose of my YouTube channel. So I showed some of my friends, and they were like really shocked, or because they never heard of like this whole carnivore thing and some of these other weird things. Carnivore also did some other things that I wasn't fully expecting, which did shock me. I heard of this one doctor in Australia, and he hasn't showered for 5 years. And I was like, what the heck? Like, this is like a foreign concept to me. And he's like, yep, I don't shower. And he looked perfectly fine. I mean, his skin was like immaculate, everything looked fine. And I was like, this guy hasn't showered for 5 years. So I sort of was like, all right, I'm kind of curious. Let's see what happens. So I got curious in that as well. And I was like, I mean, I'm willing to experiment with anything at this point because some of the things I've come across just seem so ludicrous or so ridiculous when you hear about them at first until you do them. And then you're like, why is this working? This shouldn't be working. Like I was taught my entire life a lie. So
Is this your way of saying that you're not showering?
I have not. When I discovered this, I think the last time I showered was 1,400 and something days ago. It's ridiculous, and my skin has improved. I mean, everything has improved. Like it's just weird. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, why is this working? But then I have heard other people had similar results when they try this. It's just the beginning is really bad. So there's a lot of in the gaming space, anyways. There's a lot of like very big people. One of their names is Asmongold, and Asmongold just doesn't really shower. He's a gamer. He's just like, whatever. I'm not going to shower. He's not carnivore, but he does enjoy meat. He has like a lot of Dr. Pepper and other stuff, and anyways, he doesn't shower, and I heard him talk about his experience, and he said, "Yeah, like for the first few days, for some reason, I mean, it's maybe a couple weeks, you'll smell or really bad, but then afterwards, it just stops." And I was like, "What?" So I got curious, and I decided to go without telling my mom directly because I didn't have to tell her on this one. I said, "Let's see if she can figure it out." So, and my dad was in the same vicinity this entire time. I went, I think, 2 years before any of them finally said, "Oh, Blaise, are you going to go take a shower later?" And I was like, "Have you not noticed for the past 2 years, I haven't showered? You've lived with me this entire time. You've seen me every single time, and you haven't seen me shower." And like, I told them, I was like, "Well, if it wasn't obvious, I haven't showered in 2 years." And they were like, "What? No, that's not like, that doesn't make any sense." I'm like, "Yeah, I haven't showered in 2 years." And they were really shocked. My mom was like, again, throwing a whole fit. She was like, "Blaise, go get in the shower." It's like, "You smell." She starts saying, "Blaise, you smell, Blaise, you smell, Blaise, you smell." But before then, she never ever noticed. She never said, "Blaise, you smell." She always used to love rubbing my hair and then smelling my hair. And she did this all the
All of a
time.
sudden, all of a sudden, she doesn't want to do that anymore.
All of a sudden, she stops. And it's like, oh, well, it's all because I showered, right? She suddenly noticed that I'm starting to smell. It's like, no, she didn't even notice for 2 years. Even my dad didn't notice. Like both of them did not notice. And I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. Like some of these things I'm coming across on the internet just sounds so crazy, so like against what I've ever thought was possible or thought was true. And I end up doing it, and I go, why is this working? Why is this working? Why is this working? So it didn't make any sense. And I came across Dr. Mike Mew, and he has this whole thing about mewing and like how it's like really important for face posture, and that helps with like developing a more attractive face, as well as having better breathing when you're a kid, which is really really important, especially during your developmental ages. And he had one guest on, I can't remember who it was exactly, and she said, "Yeah, all these pre-agro humans, they never ate any plants. They didn't brush their teeth, and all their teeth are immaculate." And I went, "What? Their teeth are perfect." So that got me really curious again. And she said, yeah, basically, when you're not eating any of these starchy foods, because they didn't eat them, they didn't have like any of this tooth decay or cavities and stuff. And I went, okay, now it's time to try something else. So I said, you know what? We're not going to brush our teeth for a bit, because I was like, I got curious. I was on carnivore already at that point, and I was like, there has got to be something to this. If it really works, like if what she says is true, then I shouldn't have teeth problems. I shouldn't develop cavity. I was willing to risk it, even though I hated, because I used to go to the dentist regularly before for cavities. It was terrible. I hated it. Like the drilling, I mean, it literally feels like you're walking into a torture room. You're just you're just walking in there and you're like, yep, go ahead, torture me. I'm gonna feel so much pain and agony, and even the painkiller isn't gonna help so much. So I said, you know what? If this really does work, and if I don't have to ever go to the dentist anymore, I'm going with it. Let's do this. So I tried it about two when I was in 2022, and that was it's still going on today. I've not brushed my teeth for over 700 days, probably more. I haven't counted exactly, but it's over 2 years. And it shows how true like carnivore is. Like pre-agro humans really didn't need to brush their teeth. Like I'm a great example almost at this point. 2 years, no teeth problems, no tooth decay, no cavities, no any of that. And I was a little confused at first. I was like, why? Why is this like it to me? I'm thinking again, like I was told to brush my teeth all the time. First, it was showering is really, really important for your hygiene. And then second, like brushing your teeth is very important for your oral hygiene. And I'm like, the only way this makes any sense is there is something to do with the microbiome in your mouth and on your skin and probably like everywhere else over your body. These bacteria are doing some fantabulous work. I mean, they're really going to work, because if I don't have to brush my teeth and if I don't have to shower and nobody can tell, like great. Like I'll keep doing this, because I hated brushing my teeth. I hated the taste of fluoride too as well. Like, oh, especially if you swallow it, like, oh my, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. So I really, I look at that as a thing in the past. And what's even better is I went to a dentist, and because my mom was getting so worried, because I told her, yeah, I haven't brushed my teeth in a year. And she's like, what? I did it behind her back, and she gets all worried. It's like, no, Blaise, you know what? We're going to go to a dentist. So, bam, I end up at the dentist, and he looks at my teeth. At first, the introductory woman comes in where she like asks you a couple questions, and she's like, oh, okay, now how often do you brush your teeth? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, what do you mean I don't know? And it's like, well, I just would rather like to see the dentist right now. And he's like, no, 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 no. Just tell me, how often do you brush your teeth? It's like, nah, I don't know. And then she just got so frustrated with me because I kept dodging it or avoiding it. And she's like, you know what? Whatever. I'm just going to leave this question blank. Then I'll let the dentist go deal with this. So eventually, dentist comes in and he says, so I see you answered everything except how often do you brush your teeth? Why is that exactly? Like, what's the problem? And I go, well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually. I was hoping you would tell me, how often do I brush my teeth? And if I do brush my teeth, when was the last time I brushed it and how often? And he goes, okay, whatever. So he looks at my teeth, gives it a little bit of an inspection, about 2 minutes. And he's like, well, I'd probably say you brush your teeth about every day or so. And I was like, yep. And that just sealed the deal in my mind. I looked at that and I went, even the dentist has no idea when the last time I brushed my teeth was. And I was like, what's going on? Like is everything that I knew just wrong? Everything I learned my entire life is a lie. He can't even tell. So I go through this whole like basically everything I learned in my life is a lie sort of phase in my life because of that. Like there's just so many things that just kept piling on top of each other, one after the next, after the next, after the next. And I was like, so many of these things we don't actually need to do, like under the correct diet, at the very least, for your teeth. I know for sure for without showering. I mean, a gamer who drinks Dr. Pepper all the time and eats like not necessarily the healthiest, but he's still like he doesn't shower and he doesn't smell. So I look at all this and I'm like, man, almost everything I've learned, like as of this point in my life, it almost seems like a lie.
That's at least 3 years you've been on carnivore.
Uh,
3, maybe 4 years.
I'd say about 2.5 years. I started my fasting journey lasted from 2020 to 2022, and I kept going on these crazy fasts for like 3 days, 5 days, 9 days. It was just like rampant. And then afterwards, I came into across Anthony Chaffee's work, and then I started to do carnivore. It was around 2022, early 2022 ish, or late 2021, and I've been carnivore for about I'd probably say at this point 900 or 1,000 days, around that time frame. And it's really, yeah, it's worked wonders. I mean, there's so many benefits that I wasn't expecting to get. And it all started because of boredom. I was just like, I had nothing to do. I had so much free time. I couldn't go to university because I left the university over in the Netherlands when I was doing chemical engineering over there. I left the university because the COVID hit. It's been a journey, but I mean, it's been
Wow.
really, really good. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits.
See yourself doing this permanently? I should ask, do you mind saying how old you are now?
Currently, I am 24 years old.
24. So as a 24-year-old, can you see yourself doing this forever?
Uh, I'm doing this with my kids forever. There's no question about that. I don't want my kids suffering like I did. I mean, the amount of stuff, like the acne, especially when you're young and you're developing ages, like you develop this insecurity sort of stuff, and it's not good. Same with the face shape, like having to get braces too. That erodes your jawline, which is like not good for your attractiveness. I mean, there's tons and tons of these things that carnivore just basically fixes. Like you don't need to go to the dentist, because if you just eat meat, then that price is basically taken care of. You don't need to go. The real problem that I see is carnivore works too good. That's a big problem, and that's a problem because that affects everybody's job, and I mean almost everybody's job. Like, okay, so let's just go let's just go with doctors, for instance, right? Like, I mean, they're taught I mean, oh geez, when it comes, I feel like some doctors cheated in their biochemistry class or something, because they don't even know some of this information. But regardless, um, the fact that it works too well puts so many people out of business, because what do doctors need? They need sick people. That's basically what they're there for. What do dentists need? They need people with like cavities. What do like food engineers do? Food engineers engineer food to make it taste better. And what do they use usually? Sugar and salt. And they just throw tons of sugar and salt and stuff. So if you start eliminating all of these things, you like all these jobs, they're all connected if to food in some way or another. Like restaurants, I mean, tons of these restaurants, like maybe it's a pasta restaurant, or maybe it's like some sort of ramen restaurant. Like it's all carbohydrates. It's all, and the that's a problem, because if all these people, it's like a good and a bad thing. So I think that the world will be carnivore in the future, but it's going to be forced to go carnivore in the future, and not out of its choice, but out of the fact that there will be too many problems occurring at that time. So around 2050, I think there is some sort of a thing that was posted. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was like around 30% of agricultural land will become arid, and that means that it's like unusable. And that's really, really bad, because if that's in the United States alone, like just assuming that's in the United States, you could probably assume this is also going to happen in other areas. And what happens when agricultural land goes arid? Well, the food prices are going to go up, because there's going to be a lot less of this avocados, almonds. I mean, you name it, doesn't really matter what it is. As long as it's plant based, or as long as it's basically this food that we created ourselves, because we genetically engineered it really, really long time ago. I mean, they all used to be pure fiber, and now they're pure sugar, basically, compared to what they used to be. If you look at all of that, it's just like you can't assuming that inflation is also going up as it is right now, which is like really, really high, especially in the United States with some of these food prices. I mean, some of them like doubled, which doesn't even make any sense. It goes from like making $40 just to have a meal to $70 and then to $90. It's like the COVID thing and the stimulus checks really hit the American people hard. So I know it's going to affect America pretty big. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I do know that because the rest of the world's economy is all linked to the dollar because of Richard Nixon in the 1970s. That's going to be a pretty big ripple effect for the rest of the world. It's basically dropping a like a little water, like a piece of water or a drop of water in the pond and seeing it all ripple. I mean, I think it's gonna be really bad. You have tons of these jobs. Like, I mean, cancer research is another thing. Cancer and cancer research, like all of that's gonna be gone if carnivore happens. Pharmaceuticals all go away. I mean, makers of herbicides and
The
pesticides, it's all chemical engineering. It's just
every country's diabetes association would just disappear. What are they gonna do?
yeah, exactly. Suddenly, oh my God, it looks like we don't have any of these problems anymore that we used to.
Yeah, we've been looking for the solution for 100 years and never found it, and now it's all gone.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's going to end up happening just because the agriculture is not sustainable. And just because of that alone, it's going to I think it's going to force people to go carnivore, whether or not they like it, just because one, agriculture is not sustainable. And two, even if they do manage to do, this is biochemistry, if they do manage to engineer the Rubisco enzyme to be more efficient, and to grow, make the plant more efficient in its cycle of generating uh, useful nutrients for itself. There you go. I don't want to go into the names of it, but basically the plant, it has this enzyme as of right now, and all plants have this, and it's called the Rubisco enzyme, and it's incredibly inefficient. I mean, it's so inefficient that the plant has to spend tons of energy just to fix the toxic off products that this thing produces. But some scientists recently, I think around 2019, 2018, managed to genetically engineer this enzyme in tobacco plants to not to be as inefficient and to actually be much more efficient. And when they did this, the tobacco plant grew rapidly. So even if science does manage to somehow fix the problem that was caused by agriculture when it comes to like topsoil erosion, all these other things, like it's not going to fix it permanently. It's just going to delay it. Or in fact, it might even speed it up if it's talking about like nutrients, taking nutrients out of the soil, because ruminants, cows, are so important for putting the nutrients back into the soil. Like whenever these vegans, it's just another thing. It's like so much false information going about. When you think that you're eating these plants in order to save the animals, like where do you think these plants came from? They came from the used to be habitats of these animals. You killed all their habitat and then they just died because they have nowhere else to go. Like roadkill is a really big thing, right? You see tons of roadkill in Texas. I mean, that's a really big. Oh, it's bad. Um, yeah, like roadkill is a really big thing. You could see roadkill almost in any state in the United States, for that matter. And you look at that and you go, well, where do you think like these animals ran off to? They didn't just like find another habitat. Like most of them, if not all of them, ended up dying in the process. And then not only that, other animals will realize, like other animals will come, like these rodents, and this is why the plants make herbicides and pesticides, because rodents, insects, and all these other animals go, we need something to eat. So they end up running onto the farm, and then they try to eat plants, and farmers don't like that because they need high crop yields because they need to sell their product. It's not like they don't hate. It's not like they hate the rodent because it's a rodent. They hate it because it's eating its money. Like I need my money, and you need to get out of here. So I mean, there's reasons why there's like vultures right above the like whenever these farmers are driving these giant things that like they're spinning tons of herbicides and pesticides over the field, and they're like churning the soil. Like they're
Yeah.
also killing tons of these rodents in the process. Tons of them are dying. And it's not like their vultures are up there like, oh wow, this is a really cool looking thing that you got that's turning and twisting. I'm very interested in this. It's not like that level of intelligence. No, they're doing that because they just saw the rodents dead and they're going to end up eating the rodents afterwards. Like, you also have farmers with like mice problems. I mean, you can look that one up on YouTube. I've seen plenty of videos on that. Farmers like getting rid of mice any way possible, whether it's unleashing dogs on them, whether it doesn't matter. Like, they're still killing tons of animals. And you have to realize that you can't like, sadly, that's not like the way the world works. You can't just say, oh, I don't want herbivores to die, or I don't want to eat any sort of animal, when you that's the way like nature was designed. The way it works is plants grow, and then something needs to keep the plants in control, because if the plants aren't kept in control, then forest fires happen and then everything dies. So something has to keep the plants in control. What is the job of the herbivore? That's the job of the herbivore. Keep the plants in control. So plants are eaten by the herbivores, and then suddenly what happens when the herbivores are out of control? Well, when they're out of control, they eat all the plants, everybody dies. So it's like you lose again. So what keeps the herbivores in check? Well, that's the carnivores. So it's like it's this whole cycle, and it's basically like a game of rock paper scissors. Like, rock beats paper, paper beats scissors, and scissors beats rock. And if you don't, like, you can try to ignore it as much as you want, but after a certain point, you got to realize every single time even though you're eating, like, if you are eating like cucumbers, or if you're eating lettuce, it doesn't really matter what it is at this point. If you're eating any sort of plant, you're also always going to be killing animals, because those farmers, they have to kill the animals for that crop yield. And that's if you're assuming that plants aren't also alive, which plants use very complicated chemical signaling. I mean, it's amazing. They even showed this. They showed a plant. They attached a fluorescent protein to this plant's chemical signaling um, molecule. I can't remember what it was. And they watched and they saw that there was literally like fluorescence happening from the plant's leaf all the way down to the stem to connect to and like tell another plant, like, hey, I'm in danger. Hey, this is happening. Like, I'm experiencing mechanical stress, or I'm experiencing like somebody's eating me. Like, get ready. Like, it literally just tells the other plant. So the only difference, if you really want to look at it from a perspective of like physics, the only difference between like plants and us when it comes to communication is plants communicate with chemical energy, and humans communicate with like mechanical energy. That's basically the only difference. So you look at it, and you just keep learning some of these things, and you're like, man, it's all in favor of being carnivore, or in this case, being what you originated to be. Like, you can't escape it. You can't escape your biology. Every single time you try to escape your biology, like, you just get torn right back in, or you end up dying, which that's another prospect. I mean, I know a
Mm.
couple of vegans who ended up dying because they were vegan and they said, no, my diet's the healthiest. And they just kept going and going and going, and they ended up killing themselves. And it's sad, because it's so sad, because they are probably some of the most like empathetic people too, because they care so much about the animals. Like, they really want the animals to live. So it's just it's sad.
It's unfortunate because it's kind of not seeing the forest for the trees, right? It's just focusing in on, I don't want to kill or I don't want to kill pigs or whatever it is, but it's not looking at the wider picture and going, okay, I can see how all this works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you look at
Uh,
it and you go, I don't kill the pig, or if I choose not to kill the pig, then like we all die, we all lose. Like, the
mm.
pig dies, I die, like everything dies. It's just, it has to be like ecology. The science of ecology exists for a reason. So I mean, it's really, really important. So you can't
Yeah.
ignore it. Yeah.
Mm. So, Blaise, tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel. How can we find you? And will do you have these kind of informational videos on there already?
Yes. So my YouTube channel right now is called, I think, Learning Something New 6463. I talk about a lot of the science behind carnivore. That's actually my most popular video. A lot of my other videos are like sometimes no views, but the science behind carnivore thing that apparently seemed to be really popular. And within about, I would say, a month or so of putting that video up, I got 14 views on it, which I wasn't expecting at all. So it was like it seemed to be the most popular. So I'm probably going to be doing more science related things, like very, very heavy science related things. So that's for anybody who, if they're ever like arguing against a vegan, or they want to know the other perspective, or they're just curious, like for some reason, then I'm probably going to be doing a lot of videos like that. I also just do videos about things in general. So, for instance, like when I talk to you about the catastrophe of carnivore, that's what I call it, anyways, is the fact that carnivore, I think, is bound to happen. It's going to be forced to happen just because tons of agricultural land will suddenly become completely arid. It'll become a desert. And the only way you bring back that desert is with ruminants. And that means cows. And you're going to have to eat the cows also as well. So I talk about that. I'm going to be talking about just a lot of sometimes philosophical, sometimes thought provoking, but a lot of it definitely will be carnivore. I'll also be talking a little bit about my no showering experience, as well as the no brushing my teeth experience, which I was not expecting. I wasn't expecting that to go so well, but I mean, the fact that I haven't needed to go to a dentist and the dentist couldn't even tell the last time I brushed my teeth, that one just really, really got me. Because I told my mom afterwards, and she just was like, I don't believe you. And then she goes up to the dentist, talks to him, and he's like, yeah, that's what I thought. It's like, well, looks like I was right. So yeah, I'm always down to experiment with new things also. So I always start from a baseline, but I want to know the science behind it. So if it comes to like fasting or carnivore or no brushing my teeth, no showering, if there's anything else that I'm missing, um, there's tons and tons of things. I also completely avoid microplastics. I always try to drink out of glass bottles, and that's because of endocrine disruptors. Those are also pretty bad. Those are way worse than I thought. Actually, I didn't think they were so bad until I actually got my blood test done before and after. With having always drinking out of plastic bottles versus drinking out of glass bottles, and it was just like huge shot up in testosterone from before. So I also get all my blood tests done with this stuff usually. I try to be as accurate and scientific as I can. I Because that's like who I am. I think that that's the best way we have of knowing, except our own experiences. Our own experiences are probably an even better way of knowing than science itself, because science can be flawed. But if something works, then something works clearly. Like that's the way it is. Science just has to explain it. Science isn't there to tell you like, hey, this is right and this is wrong. It has to explain this is why this is right, or this is why this is wrong. So yeah, it's the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I'll link to your channel in the show notes. And Blaise, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a pleasure. Also, a pleasure making you laugh.
And sorry, so it already
You're right.
starts.
It
You know,
adds time.
normally it's me making the guest giggle. It's the other way around tonight.
Uh,
So I'm definitely putting this at the end of the video.
yeah.